All right, doing a live video. I've been having some trouble with my phone. That's why I have not posted any videos in the last couple days, because I've been trying to upload some videos and it hasn't been working. And so I decided I'm just going to go live today and try to finish up a few threads on this video, but maybe just one in particular. I started one talking about human sexuality, why sex is not in A Course in Miracles, why Helen did not want it to be, did not think it should be. And Jesus really actually agreed with that assessment. And that's why Helen and Ken took references to sex out of the Course, apparently. But let's read, and I asked ChatGPT, and let me just say, ChatGPT generally is good, right? I think it's, for the most part, it's very accurate information. It's very good information, especially with A Course in Miracles. You wouldn't necessarily think it would, but the stuff that it shares about A Course in Miracles is very, very good. And if you're skeptical about AI, you may be missing out, because it's really good information. And so I'm going to be using that to talk about this subject today. I'm going to look on my notes here. All right, so I said to ChatGPT, I want to go back to what Helen said about sex not being in ACIM. What was the exact quote? She said something like, "Sex will not be in this course," or something like that, right? So I wasn't sure about the exact quote. I don't know where I saw it originally, whether it was in Ken Wapnick's Absence from Felicity, which is his or is his biography of Helen. Helen wrote her own autobiography, which is on the acim.org website if you want to read it. Anyway, this is what ChatGPT said to me. Yes, you're remembering correctly. There is a direct statement from Helen about this in Ken Wapnick's book, Absence from Felicity, the story of Helen Schuckman and her scribing of A Course in Miracles. He records Helen's reaction to the early text material. Helen, upon hearing Jesus' word about sex in the dictation, told Bill Thetford in no uncertain terms, "Sex will not be in this course." Now, let me just say, break in real quickly and say that sometimes ChatGPT does tell you what you want to hear. It does make up quotes. And I've called AI out on this a bunch of times. I think in this case it is being accurate, right? Ken explains that Helen was adamant about this, and it became one of the editorial decisions in shaping the course. She felt strongly that sexuality would demean or trivialize the material, and that it would confuse readers by equating love with lust. So while Jesus' early dictation did contain references to sex, which we saw in the text, Helen's editorial stance was decisive. She insisted those passages be removed or transformed into broader, more general teachings on special and holy relationships. By the way, if you are watching this live and you want to jump on and ask questions, please do. Just put in a question and I will do my best to answer. Otherwise, you might just see this on the replay. Chapter 11. This is Chapter 11, Absence from Felicity, Ken Wapnick's book. Let's see. Had some other stuff. All right. Let me just go back now to another thread while I'm waiting here for a moment. Another thread that I brought up last week, which is Gary Renard's claim that Helen Schuckman reincarnated and is alive and living today, and he knows her. Her name is Alzana, I believe, and he and his wife Cindy know her, and are and they're very sure that she really is the reincarnation of Helen Schuckman. Now, let me just say, I don't have a problem with that, if that is the case, um, I believe in reincarnation. I think that it happens. Um, I'm not absolutely certain, um, but I've seen enough, and I mentioned this book in my previous video. One of the best books, I think, to actually prove the case is called 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation by Dr. Ian Stevenson. I believe he was at like Johns Hopkins or some major university like that, where he did this research study where he studied children who claimed to be the reincarnation of someone, and he checked out their stories. Like he rigorously checked out their stories and found and brought the case, each case, 20 cases in the book, and he made a very strong case for each one of those. And so you read a book like that, let alone all the other books that are out there, that are not like rigorous academic peer-reviewed studies, but you read a book like that, and you know I would say, if you're open-minded enough and you're willing to look at actual um, you know case studies that are seriously done, rigorously checked out, then you would tend to believe that there's more going on in heaven and earth than we can figure out with our our little brains. um, but the course's position on reincarnation is it's still it's still in the dream, right? And whether you live once or many times does not really matter. What really matters is that you can awaken right now, and the only time really is now. And you find this idea actually in Christianity, the idea of one life. You have one life, right? And we hear this phrase enough, that we have one life to live. And I think there's a sense in which the Course affirms that there's only, if you can do it this time around, why why wait, right? What's the point of being reincarnated again? If you really think through the idea of that you're going to come back again and you're going to have another chance, for some people that's very comforting, a comforting idea, right? And the Course mentions that, right? The idea that, yeah, there really is life after death. No one, there's more, there's something going on. There's a spiritual dimension of life. We have a soul, right? Et cetera, et cetera. All that is very helpful, I think, for some people. It's been helpful for me. On the other hand, there is this idea of you got one life to wake up. You can do it right now, right? You can do it in this lifetime. You can do it right here and now. Why would you wait? And what's the sense of living again and again and again if you can wake up in this lifetime? And what does that mean? I think it's passing the course, right? That's really what it means. Is fully understanding what the Course is saying, and awakening from the dream of separation. Who has really done that fully? I don't know. I feel like I have had glimpses, right? And I can talk about those experiences I've had, and I'm sure you probably have had your own. If you're watching this, and if you're a Course student, or if you're a student of spirituality, if you're a spiritual seeker or on a spiritual journey, you've probably had your own experiences, things that have blown your mind or opened your mind. And so you are, you're on the path. Has anyone really fully understood this while they're in the body? I'm not sure if anyone truly has. There are great, I think there are great masters living today. I don't, we could talk about that. Maybe I should do a whole video just on that, about people that are considered to be avatars living on planet Earth today, whose followers believe that they truly understand the mystery of life. But right, let's just read about this question about Gary's claim about that Helen reincarnated. And I just want to mention again, because we live in this very politicized society if you're in the U.S., but even if you're not in the U.S., the world is becoming more and more politicized. And it's interesting how the Trump presidency has really brought this to the fore, for many people. So it's hard to avoid it these days. And I wanted to bring up again this statement from another course teacher, and I'm kind of giving you a gossip, right? But I'm not naming names so much. But this one course teacher said to me that Gary Renard is like the Donald Trump of the ACIM community, which I can see, But let me say this. I think um, um, uh, in Gary's case, what I see with Gary, in a way, if, let's put it this way: if Gary is making up a story, um, and he's basically doing doing something fraudulent, which is what people have claimed. This guy that said he's the Donald Trump of the ACIM community, he was trying to say that he's a fraud, just like Donald Trump is a fraud. He's a con artist, right? Right? He's trying to pull one over on innocent students of A Course in Miracles that don't know better. And let me say this about Trump: is that Trump clearly lies, is a prodigious liar. He's a chronic liar. Let's just take his saying that 300 million people is just recently. He said 300 million people died of drug overdoses or something like that, right? Now, did he mean 300 million people in the United States? There's only 340 or 50 million people total in the United States. um, did he mean in the whole world? That's still an inflated number if he was talking about the whole world. So, he the thing about Donald Trump is he's gotten away with this for a very long time. He's gotten away with a lot of things. And so he knows that he can lie. He doesn't have to check his facts. He doesn't have to be very exact in anything, because he knows that people are going to believe him. At least his base is going to believe him, right? The 30% of the U.S. population who will believe him no matter what are going to believe him, right? So he knows, his famous statement: I could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and people would still, I would still have my followers, right? I'd still have the MAGA base. And the same thing, and then there are the people that actually fact check and question and think about these things, and they call Trump out on his BS, all the time. And the same thing, I think you could say the same thing about Gary, is that Gary, maybe, I'm not saying this is true, because I got to give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that Gary, well, whatever is the case, let's say that Gary made up the story about his ascended masters giving him this information, and really he just concocted this story to sell books and I think that Gary truly wants to get the message of A Course in Miracles out. I don't know if that's the highest way to do it, because in the process um, he's making it sound like this is coming from a higher source when it's really coming from himself, right? And if it's coming from himself, then he really is just interpreting the course, but making it sound as if it's coming from, like, these great beings that know everything. Even if it's coming from Ken Wapnick, it's still filtered through Gary, right? Let's say that Ken Wapnick fully understood the course. I'm not saying he did or he didn't, right? I believe that Ken Wapnick really understood the course just as well as anyone, maybe better than anyone, right? Maybe not, who knows? But even so, Gary would still be filtering the course through his own egoic filter, right? He's not giving pure Ken Wapnick. He's giving some Ken Wapnick and some of his own, again, concocted story. But also, I think I'm sure his intention is there, which is to bring awareness to A Course in Miracles. I kind of think that he's also doing a polemic against the Robert Perry and the other the people across the aisle, in the Course in Miracles world that are that are against Ken Wapnick. This is if Gary made up his story, right? And Gary's banking on the fact that there will be enough people that will believe his story, that he'll get away with it, and he'll get, he'll be rich and famous, which he is, right? And respected as a great course teacher, and he is a very good teacher. Let's give him that. He's a very, very good teacher, and I enjoyed his books very much, and I also learned a lot from him. I wouldn't base things on his books anymore, but I still think he did a very good job of writing his books. Let me put it that way. He also, I think his books got a little bit crazier as they went along, and a little bit. I think his first book was his best, The Disappearance of the Universe. But that's a whole nother talk for another time. But let me just say this, that he's kind of, if he made up the story, he's doing something similar to Donald Trump, which is he knows that he's going to have people that believe his story, that buy his story, enough people, and there will always be those people that call him out on it. And it doesn't matter, though, right? If there are those people, and in fact those people that call him out on it are just going to give him even more publicity, and he'll become even more popular, more well known, more of a name, right? Same with Donald Trump. He knows that being controversial, definitely in politics, is a good thing. I think Charlie Kirk knew that as well, right? Charlie Kirk knew that being controversial gets you viewers, gets people talking about you, right. So anyway, let's see what ChatGPT says about this issue with Gary. It says, let's dig a little. This is ChatGPT now. Let's dig a little deeper into Gary Bernard's position and how it connects with Helen reincarnation in the course. Gary's core narrative in The Disappearance of the Universe and later books, Gary says he was visited by two beings, Arten and Persa, who would identify themselves as ascended masters. According to them, they had been disciples of Jesus 2,000 years ago and now appeared to Gary to help him understand and teach A Course in Miracles. They told Gary that Helen Schucman had reincarnated since her death in 1981, though they didn't name her present identity. Gary's claim about Helen, Arten and Persa reportedly said that Helen came back quickly after dying. Now, let me just say this, that Jesus apparently had told Helen that he was going to come for her after her death. Now, what does that mean, that Jesus was going to come for Helen after her death? some took it to mean that she was not going to come back again, right? That was her last lifetime. She would return home. She would not reincarnate again. And she apparently died with a beatific smile or beatific presence, even though her later life, especially toward, in her dying days, she was frantic and and going through very difficult time, in the death process. But apparently, when she actually died, she had a. Alba, that's great. That's great. Close the door, okay? I'll be in soon, okay? So that's that's one thought. But Gary, okay. So Art Persa reportedly said that Helen came back quickly after dying. Gary has repeated in talks and interviews that Helen reincarnated and is alive today, but he has never revealed who she supposedly is. Well, that's not true. He has revealed. That's not true. His reasoning: Helen's task wasn't finished. She needed to work further on her mind training. So Gary has revealed who Helen's reincarnation is. It's a woman named Alzina that he and his wife know, and apparently other people know and are convinced that she is really the reincarnation of Helen Schuckman. How Gary frames it: Gary presents reincarnation as part of the illusory dream, not ultimately real, which is consistent with the Course, and that is consistent with the Course. But he says that on the level of illusion, reincarnation is a useful teaching device because it shows us the long arc of forgiveness and undoing the ego. So that is one thought with reincarnation, is that if you don't get it right in one lifetime, you get more chances, and that shows that there is divine mercy, divine, the God is merciful. Now, ultimately, God has no part in the illusion, so that would be a anthropomorphization of God. But just the idea that that you come back and you get more chances to wake up, I think is a helpful one for many people. In his narrative, Helen is one example of this ongoing journey, just like all of us. Reception of Gary's claim. Many readers of his books find the claim intriguing because it gives a sense of continuity. Helen's story isn't, quote unquote, over. However, Course teachers like Ken Wapnick strongly distance themselves from Gary's teachings. Wapnick called Gary's work not helpful and a distortion of, wow, I was not aware of that, and I don't know if that's really true. Ken has made a case that not Ken, but Gary has made the claim that Ken Wapnick was in support of Gary's work. So I want to look into that more. Maybe I'll ask ChatGPT right now. What's the story with that? Serious scholars, Robert Perry, Alan Watson, etc., also generally ignore Gary's reincarnation claim, seeing it as unverifiable and not essential. Of course, though, they would be against Gary because they're against everything that Gary does and stands for. How it relates to the Course's teaching. The Course itself says, in the ultimate sense, reincarnation is impossible. There is no past or future, and the idea of birth or death has no meaning. It doesn't deny reincarnation, but calls it a teaching device, useful for some, distracting for others. What matters is whether you practice forgiveness now. Okay. And I think Gary, he affirms that and he acknowledges that. He doesn't try to go against the Course. So Gary's position is basically this: Helen reincarnated soon after her death. She did so because she still had inner work to do, like all of us. This doesn't contradict the Course because reincarnation is still part of the dream, but it's not ultimately important. And then it gives me a prompt for what to say in a video like this. It says Gary Renard teaches that Helen Schuckman reincarnated after her death, but this is based on his private revelation from Arten and Persa. The course itself says reincarnation doesn't ultimately matter. What matters is forgiveness now. So whether or not Helen came back, the important thing is that she left us the course, and that's where our focus belongs. All right. In the next 5 minutes, before I sign off here, I don't want to make this too long. I would love to hear any feedback you want to give. I don't see anyone. I saw a couple people on before who jumped off, but if you do watch this on the replay, I would love any feedback you have to give about this video. Was it helpful? Did you find it interesting? What else do you want me to talk about? Do you want me to do more live videos? Yeah, just let me know. I'm here to serve, to be truly helpful. So, all right. Here and now it gives a timeline. ChatGPT gives a timeline of sex in ACIM. So the early dictation, 1965 to 1966, and the first months of dictation, what we now call the text, Jesus speaks explicitly about sex and special relationships. The passages discuss how the ego uses sexuality to confuse bodies with love, how sex can induce guilt, and how sexual relationships could be given to the Holy Spirit to become holy. These sections are very direct and specific about sex, much more so than anything in the published course. Right, so Jesus had quite a bit to say about sex, actually, in the text. So it's interesting that it all got taken out, which has led some people to say, well, did they have to take all of it out? Why couldn't some of it been in there, stayed in there? Helen's reaction. Helen was deeply uncomfortable with the sexual material. To Bill Thetford, she declared, sex will not be in this course. For her, sex was too earthy, too charged, and too easily misunderstood. She feared it would, quote unquote, cheapen the message or confuse love with lust. I personally think Helen was right about that. I think this is a scripture, and it really would not fit with the rest of the course, right? Stylistically speaking, on the level of form, talking about sex just would not. It would not really fit with the whole style of the course. So I think she was right about that. This was not just modesty. It reflected her personal struggles with sexuality and her desire for the course to be seen as dignified universal scripture. Okay, was it really based on her struggle with sexuality, or was it more of her as an editor, right? I don't think we really know, but I think Helen had a wisdom that maybe she's not given credit for enough, and she had a personal integrity. In fact, Ken Wapnick said that she had impeccable integrity, and I think that was probably true. From what I've seen, what I know about Helen, I think she was a person of great integrity. And even though she also had, the crazy ego, but I think when push came to shove, she followed the highest wisdom. She followed her true self. First edits when Helen and Bill began typing up the notes into a cleaner version. Sexual references were the first things to be cut or softened. This is the mid to late 60s. For example, where the Urtext said, the love of God and the love of man's ego cannot coexist. The ego uses sex as proof that love is limited to bodies. The published course instead reads, the special relationship is a device for limiting yourself to a body and for limiting your perception of others to theirs. Ken Wapnick's involvement, 1972 onward. So Ken came on the scene rather late. The course had already been fully scribed. I don't know if you can see me. I don't know if it matters, but on the screen here, I look very dark. But anyway, there we go. So so Ken actually came very late on the scene. He did not edit the course the way most people that are against him think that he did. That he just kind of swooped in and he made all these major edits. That's not the case. He suggested edits that Helen took into consideration, and Helen was the final arbiter. She was the final. She had to put her imprimatur on it, and she had to consult with Jesus about it. Did she always do that? I don't know. Maybe she did not. But in the end, I think Helen had to agree with Ken's suggestions. And again, Helen was a person of integrity. Ultimately, she was a faithful scribe. Let me just finish, bud. I'm almost done.
No,
I'm almost
you
done.
said, can I play Frisbee?
Yeah, bud. I'm almost done, bud. Ken Wapnick's involvement in 1972 onward. Ken joined Helen and Bill in 1972. By then, Helen had already made the decision that sex references wouldn't appear in the published course. Ken supported this. He agreed that sexuality was not central to the course's message and that the essential teaching, special versus holy relationships, could stand on its own without singling out sex. Because ultimately, it's not just about sex, it's about the body in general, right? Sex is just one part of things. It's a big part, but it's not the only. Ken later explained Helen insisted that sex not be in the course, and she was right. Nothing essential was lost because sex is only one instance of the larger problem of specialness. Final published version, 1975. By the time the Foundation for Inner Peace published the course, the sexual material was entirely gone. What remains are the generalized teachings on special versus holy relationships, on the ego's use of the body, on guilt, exclusivity, and possession. These principles apply equally to sex, but readers must make the connection themselves. Just to summarize, then, in the early dictation, sex was explicitly discussed. Helen was adamant sex will not be in this course. She and Bill cut those references in the first edits, and Ken later agreed. The principles survived in a universalized form, so the course still addresses sexuality, but only implicitly under the larger umbrella of special versus holy relationships. All right, and that's all I got for right now. I hope this is helpful. Today we talked about why sex is not in A Course in Miracles, and I think it's not in there for a very good reason. It's not to mean that sex is bad or wrong or anything like that. It's just, I think ultimately it was more a stylistic concern, not to confuse people with talking about sexuality when it's really about the body in general and special relationships in general that really needed to be talked about. And then I talked about Gary Renard, and I tried to bring in Trump, and this idea that Gary Renard is the Donald Trump of the ACIM community, I think, which is kind of funny, but there's something to that as well. And ultimately, it's all about honesty. Right? Everything comes down to honesty and being honest. But I think there's a lot to be said for the big lie, right? The idea of the big lie. With Gary Renard, he's telling the big lie. If Art and Persa, his ascended masters, are not real, he's telling the big lie, but he's telling it in order to tell a greater truth. Is he right about that? Who knows? But all right, bud, give me 1 second. All right, my son wants to play Frisbee, so I'm going to go. And I hope this is helpful. Let me know. And all right, thanks for listening, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye. All right, bud.